Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. Welcome to today's episode of In This Body. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, and I'm so honored to be joined by the incredible Giselle La Pompe-Moore. Giselle is an advocate for slow living, the author of Take It In, and the creator of the Substack Be Difficult, Darling. As an artist, writer, and deep thinker, Giselle's work invites us to embrace healing, joy, and reflection in a world that often feels disconnected and hurried. In our conversation today, we'll explore how embodiment can serve as a profound tool for manifestation, drawing on Giselle's insights and unique perspective. We'll also dive deep into her experiences with solitude, the themes in her book, and the powerful connection between embodiment and sisterhood. At the end of this episode, as a special gift to you, we will also spend time going through what Giselle calls a life edit to be done at the end of the new year, and the importance of devotion in creating the year you want to live next year. Giselle, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. Welcome to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. I am so excited to have Giselle back because she was the first guest that I had. And in that episode, she actually interviewed me, which was such a delight. And ever since then, I've been really looking forward to having you back. Giselle, I'm going to ask you the first question I ask every guest on this podcast. What does being in your body mean to you?
And what a beautiful question to begin with. I think that being in my body really feels like deep presence. It makes me feel like both my insides and my outsides are deeply tethered to all that exists within me and around me. And I think so often when I'm not in my body, I'm in another tense. I'm in the past or I'm in the future. And my body becomes this place where I remember who I am and I return back to who I am. So yeah, I think this beautiful mix of presence and remembering.
I love that. A question that I often ask to follow up is what led you kind of back into your body or led you to be mindful of embodiment? Your book, Take It In, offers a grounding perspective on manifestation and slow living, but also weaved into that is a lot of embodiment work and invitations to be in the body. And I'm curious to hear what led you there.
I think only recently, it's almost like we have this thought knowledge of why we do what we do, and then we have this like somatic knowledge of why we do what we do. And I think I realized that when I was younger and the ages where I guess I experienced different versions of big T and little t traumas, I think I left the physicality. It felt really safe to be in a spiritual, mental, emotional space, to be able to process and to make sense of things. My body wasn't a safe place for me to inhabit for most of my life. And the norm was really delicious, right? The norm was, something that I love being in, which is in that spiritual, almost like liminal space. And it's only been in the last 5 years that I've really grounded into, oh my gosh, how much have I been missing? And that was almost the question that led me into deeper embodiment was, what have I been missing? I always felt like the body was a hard place for me to come home to. And when I made that shift into what am I missing, it just felt like I was able to connect more. And yeah, I think in a way it was for sure trauma that got me in and out of my body. And it has been that feeling of remembering and the lack that I've occupied, which I didn't know I was occupying, which has given me the permission to come back. And It's not always been a fun ride, but I think there has been such beauty in me knowing that I was avoiding that space because the other stuff felt more juicy to me. And now to
Mm.
have all of those parts of me coming back together and almost having this little reunion feels really special.
For the listener who maybe identifies as being someone who likes to hang out in the ethereal or spiritual or more liminal spaces, do you have any guiding wisdom? First, like how you identify if you are hanging out in those places because they do feel so good. And also some guiding wisdom to know how to come back to your body if you are avoiding it.
Yeah, I think what feels the most prominent for me when I think about the safety net of the spiritual is that being in your body is a spiritual practice.
Mm,
And I think we forget that because I guess if you could draw a diagram of what a spiritual sensation is, then it would feel like maybe a cloud or some smoke. It feels like this really intangible thing. And because we're having a human experience, so much of our spirituality is, of course, rooted in this physicality and this humanness and the sticky, fleshy stuff. And when I was able to see how much I could benefit from being in my body and how it gave me a deeper connection to everything, that was, yeah, enough of motivation for me to be in there because when I'm in my body or just doing a body scan, I feel such a connection to my physicality that then makes me feel more connected to this planet, which makes me then feel more connected to anything that could be beyond this planet. And
mm,
there's something really special about that. And I think my knowing when I'm too far into that spiritual, emotional space is when I'm just not asking my body to come and join the party. It's often if I have a thought or I'm very quick to intellectualize something.
mm,
And my therapist, Amanda's been really great at kind of bringing me back because I'll come into our sessions with, so guess what I discovered about myself this week? And I'll have, theories and I'll have research and I'll have data and I'll have, sensations and feelings. And she'll just say, and what's your body saying about that? And it was a question I didn't know how to answer. I was looking for the right one and just being able to sit in that space and be like, yeah, my tummy just feels a bit weird. And to let that be enough, almost in some ways is such a spiritual way of looking at our bodies because with spirituality and however we decide to define that for ourselves, it is a perpetual question mark. There is no
mm.
certainty or any kind of knowing. We just have comfort in what we can find comfort in.
You're leading me into what I wanted to spend some time actually speaking to you about today. Knowing that we're coming up to the end of the new year, it's such a time where we can have lots of thoughts and ideas around how the year went or theories around what we want next. And I would love to hear from you because you have written a book on manifestation, how we can actually, ensure that we aren't just using our mind to cultivate endless lists around what we want to do next year or upcomingly, and how we can actually bring the body into what we desire for the next 365 days and beyond.
I think, our body is almost like the most precious compass we have
Mm,
for deciding where we want to go next. And I often say to people, how does it feel to audit the year that's gone? And that audit for some people gives us these ideas that it has to be these lists of, well, this didn't go well and this did go well. And for me, the audit is a felt embodied approach to looking at manifestation because we're looking back in time and we're reflecting on how did my body feel when I was with this person? How did my body feel when I was in this space? How did my body feel when I was resistant to doing the work? And that gives us such rich feedback because it isn't going to always be pleasant.
mhm,
Often our bodies feel really inconvenient, especially when it comes to goal setting and to desires. I think we've all had an experience of, dating someone and our minds are like, yes, I love this, I want more of this. And your body's like, I don't think we need to be here. So if we're almost, manifesting or desiring from a space of the mind, can we trust what we receive there?
mhm,
And it almost becomes that we're then desiring from a place of should or a place of fear or a place of story. Whereas when we really sit with the discomfort and the joy of being deeply present in our bodies, we just get a more true answer. And it may not be the answer we want to hear right now, but it's often the answer that will be sustainable for the year ahead.
When I hear you speak of this, one thing that pops out to me is you even use the word should, like what
Mm.
we think we should have. Um, when you are in supporting someone or in your own life, how do you kind of peel back the should and all the societal stuff that often does lead us to want to manifest a life that actually isn't even aligned with our authenticity?
Yeah, I think it's so important that we always have like this, psycho, spiritual, cultural approach to everything that we're doing. There's so much crossover with all of them. And I think if we stick within one box, we miss so much on the others. Because, I think there's so much talk in spirituality or manifesting around, limiting beliefs and clearing blockages, which I don't believe in. I think we need a more gentle approach to speaking to ourselves. And we don't live in these like silos, right? So it's like our thoughts don't exist without cultural conditioning and social norms, or our fears always exist alongside racism, poverty, financial insecurity. Like so much stuff affects how we see ourselves and our perception of ourselves. So how could we only limit ourselves to I am the way I am because I think this way? And it's like, okay, but I am the way I am because I think this way, but I'm also impacted and influenced by the world around me. Just even watching Disney films growing up just gives us so much conditioning, right, of how to show up as women or in relationships. So when it comes to the shoulds, for me, I'm always looking at these three boxes of where did my shoulds come from in regards to my family and other people? Where did my shoulds come from in terms of the TV shows that I watched and the Instagram that I'm scrolling on? And where did my shoulds come from myself and my own
Mm.
expectations? So I think when we kind of can cover all bases, it gives us this more holistic approach to coming back to authenticity, because we're understanding that, yeah, nothing here exists in isolation. And it also allows us to have some self-compassion. I think we believe it's like, well, this is all my stuff and I have to work through my stuff. And it's like, yeah, okay, but I can have some ownership, but also be very aware that, of course, I feel this way in the systems that we're living in.
Mm. That's one thing that always has stood out to me about you. And there's many things, but that capacity to hold the systems and how that influences your own mind, your own experience, your experience of spirituality, and how that trickles out. And I heard it in your book when I read it, and I've heard it from you many times. Is there an experience, and I don't imagine there is just one in particular, that really opened that up for you? Or was it a gradual awareness that built of maybe coming across things and being like, this doesn't work for me, or this isn't intersectional enough, or I can't find myself in here, or maybe it was one moment?
I think what's interesting is that I found manifesting, or the law of attraction, or whatever you want to call it, really early.
Mm,
So I was about 15 when I first started engaging in this work. And at the time, it was very spiritual bypassing. It was very much, you ask for something, you write it down, and you'll obviously receive it. And your success kind of, hinges upon how much work you do internally, how much you believe is possible. So yeah, I was 15 and I naively believed that if I just said I'm a millionaire, I would obviously be one. And when I was not a millionaire, I then went into all of this blame. And I thought, well, if I just had done 222 affirmations, maybe it would have happened for me. And it took me a long time. I think I was always just trying or looking for the new practice from a new author or coach or healer to tell me what was the best way for me to get something. And over time, and as I got older, I was like, well, who is telling me to do this? And can I resonate with them? Because I was reading the same story, which was, from lots of books on manifesting. Well, I was in this circumstance. I then followed these 3 to 6 steps, and then I changed my life. And if you follow these 3 to 6 steps, and you too can change your life. And I was looking at me and I was looking at them and I was saying, but if I am not a white woman or a white man who had relatively stable upbringing, who didn't experience much trauma, who had financial security, do those steps apply for me?
mhm,
And the answer was no. I mentioned in my book that the borough in London that I grew up in, it has like the second highest rate of child poverty in the United Kingdom. That's my experience and my reality. So there's no possible way that by just saying that I'm rich, I'm just going to be rich. There was so much layers I had to work through around my relationship to money. I had to look at What does it mean to be a Black woman in a very racist society? I had to look at so many experiences that I've been through that made me feel like I wasn't enough, that I could never achieve something, that I couldn't do something. And when I was seeing that, I was thinking, well, if I'm not seeing myself in this, and who else isn't? Even just most books on spirituality written by women, I was like, are men seeing themselves in this? Are people who are older seeing themselves in this? Are people who, yeah, have really intense jobs seeing themselves in this? That you can't just
Mm.
have, a meditation download and leave your job to manifest your dreams when you've got bills to pay. So I think I was really struck by that, and also the lack of diversity on the bookshelves.
Thank you for sharing that piece and bringing yourself in such an intimate way. I'm curious to hear from you now that you have written the book and the book has been out for a while. Do you feel like it did start to crack some of that narrative or add diversity when you look at how things are going in the narrative around manifesting or goal setting or practices? Have you noticed a shift? I mean, it sounds like you've been in that specific area, had your focus on the area for much longer than I have. I kind of saw it and then was like, yeah, it doesn't fit with the level of childhood trauma I have here. I don't think this is for me. And I never really picked it back up. Have you noticed a shift at all, or does it seem like the same rhetoric from the same people on repeat?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's really hard because I think so much of this space is polluted by how we show up on social media. And
Mm,
it can be such a murky place to exist in when, if we are following, and it's for more things beyond just manifesting, but when we're kind of in this very competitive or comparison led way of looking at each other, which is often, we see the performative beauty of someone's Instagram page and what they choose to show us. And we can often be so struck by, well, this is someone's dream life. And if they're selling me how they got it, and the answer
mm,
is in these 3 steps, which can be actually just like really deep inner work, which should not be done alone, right?
mhm,
If they're saying to me that I changed my life, I healed myself through these steps, and look what I have. I have this really huge house and I've got all this success. Then so many of us watch that and witness it and say, well, if I just do what she did, then I too can have that. And there's such a lack of reflection that we're almost invited into that says,
mm,
do I want that, or do I just want to be her? And
mhm.
it's so murky when someone's selling you the fix. So I think the industry's got a long way to go, because I think we're still almost in that celebrity culture bubble of, we want the things that someone has. And it's before I jumped on with you, I saw this morning that the word of the year, which they do every year, is manifest, which is huge. And it's insane because it still is met with a lot of skepticism, right? And it's still one of
Mhm.
those topics that feels like, is that really real? Is that true? There's can be kind of like a 50-50 approach to it. So for it to become this word of the year, like really speaks to what we're desiring, how much the cultural shift we've had. And it is really incredible. It was always something that was spoken about in these like hushed whispers, but even the article in The Guardian that described how this word has become the word of the year was, yeah, it was like celebrity culture. It was
Mhm.
Dua Lipa mentioned it at Glastonbury, that she was like, yeah, I manifested being here. So I think, going forward, as we think almost manifesting 2.0, it's like, what voices are we centering? And do we all feel
Mhm.
included? Does there feel like this can work with a world that feels very hard to exist in for some people?
I love that you asked this question, like, do I want to be her or do I want to do the things that she's doing? And we could switch in any gender there. How do you pull that apart if you are working with someone or even in yourself? Because that seems like a very daunting question when I heard it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think it's a model that I guess has existed since time began, and it's just that we just didn't have access to people. So even,
Hmm.
in the past, if you wrote a book, you could exist without having any kind of social platform.
Mhm.
You'll just write your book on a lovely wood cabin, and nobody would ever bother you. But now you're expected to always be more than the things that you wanted to do. So if you are a writer, you should also be a writer and a speaker. If you're a speaker,
Mhm.
you should also have a podcast. If you have a podcast, you should also then have a course. It's like there's so many things that you have to be, and when that is intermingled with this approach of I've made my own process and it's worked on me and me alone, there is a gap with are we certified to do that? And I think we spoke about this
Mm-hmm.
so many times, and it can be such a grace space because you don't have to be qualified to do this work. You don't have to have any experience of working with people. So often, a lot of the narratives we hear around spirituality or manifesting are very much a personal journey that becomes shared. And I think for all of us, there has to be some criticism with, does this apply to me? And it's, it's also, I mean, scarier for me is when it lends into that nutrition space, right? And it's like, well, I ate these 5 foods to cure this thing and it worked on me. And I'm like, did it work on anyone else? And I think it offers us this, uncomfortable reflection to say, can I trust this person? Can I trust their story? Does it apply to me? And if it doesn't, can I find my own way of coming into this? Because I think for me, this work and this practice has to be one where we allow ourselves to be centered within it. That it works for everyone because we're running it through the filter of our own experiences, of the way our minds work, if we're neurodivergent. Like we're running it through our own sense of self. So I think sometimes coming into this work with almost like a ground level understanding of who we
Mm-hmm.
are allows it to be almost like a safer journey.
And that is such a challenging practice if the entire culture around you has decentered your experience. How do you recenter your own experience in your own life? Do you have any wisdom for someone who's maybe like, "Ooh, I deeply resonate with that"?
Yeah, I think there's a balance between almost this hyper independence and this independent state. I think when I wasn't seeing myself reflected in the culture, especially when it comes to self help, self care, manifesting, and spirituality, I then was like, well, I don't need anyone. I'll just
Mm,
figure it out myself and do my own stuff. And there was a beauty in that to a point that then became really isolating. So when I wasn't seeing myself reflected, what I then said was, well, I can't do this myself.
mm,
So I will then find community who I can do this with. And I think that has been the missing piece. And I think it can be the missing piece to so many of us. We don't have to go to the bookshelf and look for, similar authors to our different identities, but we can find our community which has similar identities to us, and having that safe space. And I think I felt, especially in the UK, and just even in Black culture, there is this fear of the spiritual. So
mm,
many of our practices were wiped out because of colonialism. So there is this heavy preference towards Christianity. And if you're not in that box, then it feels incredibly isolating. Like, where do I find my people if they are not Christian and if they are spiritual? So when I found my community of Black women and women of color who do this work and who we can be in circle together, there's something so incredibly healing about that, because it gives you this permission to exist and to be authentic and to feel safe in the work that you know is so life-changing.
mm. Is this win for you your kind of deep emphasis and prioritization of sisterhood came to be? Or was that maybe always a beautiful part of you?
Yeah, I think it's always been a part of me. And I think a lot of it is started from how close me and my mum are.
Mm,
I'm an only child, so my mum was for sure my first my first friend. And when I didn't have any friends to play with, I really enjoyed my solitude. But my mum always became this real sense of sisterhood for me, and always reiterated to me how important that was to cultivate. And I just found such a home there. I think the shadow of it for sure was so much of my early trauma was inflicted by men. So they didn't feel safe to me, and women always did.
mm,
And they became this evidence file for nurturing and support and for love and for growth. So I really centered and prioritized that. And as I stepped more into my healing journey, around my relationship to men, I still felt this huge amount of love and adoration for my sisters, especially in a society that doesn't echo that that's where our energy should be going.
mhm,
It was the opposite of those social narratives and those rom-coms that were like, you don't need any friends, just go and find someone to be partnered with.
mhm.
And for me, the opposite was true. I was just felt so much love and joy and safety in those spaces. And they get to exist regardless of your relationship status, right? And I think that's something that we forget, that they're not these seasonal relationships that we have until we find someone. It is this like ever growing, expansive life commitment to being in sisterhood, because we share so many of the same stories, and having those reflections can be so beautiful.
Why do you think they are framed so commonly for women as seasonal?
It almost to me, it benefits patriarchy, right? If we're not in union, if we are seeing each other as competition, or we're seeing each other as, well, I don't know if I'm going to find my people here. If we frame it as, they're almost like stops on the way to romantic relationships, it benefits patriarchy and also capitalism. I think, when Trump first got elected and we had those women marches across the world, it's like, that doesn't serve our system when we get together.
Mm-hmm.
And in so many parts of history, we see so many revolutions that happen just from women sitting around a circle and sharing their stories. Laws will be changed and we'll be fighting for things, so that, that impetus for us to dislike or to distrust or to compare, it benefits so many things, even just down to beauty standards. If I'm looking at another woman with those lens of, I wish I looked like her, I will probably buy something to look like her. But if I'm seeing and honoring each other's individual beauty, which happens when you are in like in-person sisterhood, and you just have this appreciation for all different bodies, beauties, sizes, ethnicities, religions, everything, you're less likely to buy into that. So I often say that it doesn't serve the state for us to be in sisterhood. So that is the reason why we should be in it.
I love that. Do you have any wisdom or guidance if someone is looking towards the new year and they want more sisterhood in their life? How you can start to also move through your own internalized misogyny, internalized patriarchy, and all that stuff that actually gets in the way of connecting to women so that you can actually bring more of that into your new year?
Yeah, I think I think I get asked a lot of questions because I think I center my female friendships so heavily on like, oh my, I can't find any friends. Like, how do I find them? How did you find them? And a lot of it is through sliding in DMs. I do think there's such a power in that. And, often we're looking for an angle. And I totally get that. I think because I have had my own business, it kind of, there is like this soft, gentle approach. If somebody wants to get in touch with me, it's like, oh, I like your work. That could be like an easy compliment. But sometimes I've made friends just by saying, I just think you're really cool and I think we should be friends. And I think just that knowing that we're all feeling the same way, this is not easy for anyone. And to know that we can take a step out of our comfort zone because we will gain so much love and beauty in our lives is always worth doing. I think it's like anything else, whether it is, if we have a goal with our careers or even if we just have a goal to be in partnership, we do something about it. So that same energy that we may join a dating app or go to a networking event, why are we not having that same intention for friendships? So if we had, if we're swiping for 10 minutes on Hinge, and can we be swiping for 10 minutes on Instagram and messaging some women that we adore and would love to have in our lives, or just give a compliment to, that goes such a long way. It could be, I love something that you wrote. Some of my friendships started from a place of inspiration. It was, I just see who you are in the world and I think you're pretty great. And then we just see what happens from there. But it's like there's such a huge potential for online relationships that can then turn into something special. And I think we just don't really see that they can be a vessel for friendship.
hmm There's often such a negative connotation around social media, or just such a common conception or common practice of it being used as a tool of comparison instead of a tool of connection, which it can definitely be. Do you have any other wisdom of how one could use social media in the new year in maybe a different way so it is actually a place of connection and not a place of comparison or competition, and starting to change the relationship you have?
Yeah, I think the first thing is deconditioning from the algorithm. I think
Hmm.
it's kind of been this like mini god for us with what's it doing, how should we be showing up, how's it changing, how can I get more engagement, how can I get more followers. And I think at this point nobody's thriving in these spaces because we have no idea what's happening. We can't keep up with how fast technology is moving. So if we know that we may not be benefiting from the same metrics that we did in the past in terms of growth, then let's change what we get from it. And for me, that has been, I don't really post much anymore. I just spend time in conversation and let's change what engagement means. So if for us, engagement doesn't mean us, selling a service or having somebody follow our newsletters or listen to our podcast. Instead, it could be every week I'd like to have 3 conversations with someone,
Hmm.
or I would like to engage in a part of the world that I don't know about, or I would like to listen to voices that don't sound like mine. So I think it can be this really rich tool for access to voices and to centering other voices. It's like, thinking about how divisive this world we live in is, and we're so often surrounded by sameness. Most of our friends have the same beliefs as us, and that means we often get very surprised, if elections don't go the way we hope they would, if we're seeing conflicts and we're really shocked that people may think the other way that we do. Those platforms can become a really beautiful educational space of, can I just be surrounded by people who are challenging,
Mm-hmm.
who are uncomfortable? Because for me, the only way that we get to any semblance of collective healing is by listening to each other. And that doesn't happen by listening to the same people. So even just in terms of like diversifying our friendship groups, that can be such a great space to come into that.
Mm. When you look to your new year, is kind of healing maybe some of the divisiveness in your own life or in your own psyche, um, something you would like to call in, or how do you see decisiveness kind of play out in the world right now? And I think on more of a global level, it is kind of something we're all ideally trying to eliminate or have more softness around.
Yeah, I think we're not talking to each other.
Hmm.
And we read reports about, anything from, being on the left or the right or the growing gender divide. And there's no sense of maybe we should sit down and talk to each other. There's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of stories around, well, this side thinks this and this side does this. And it's like, well, why don't we just ask each other? And remember that we actually all have the same goal, which is furthering our humanity and trying to save the planet. And if we sat in a room, whether that is a digital or an in real life one, maybe we can start to work towards that. And I think it requires a lot of comfort that we are, a lot of discomfort that we're not used to. Because I was watching a Bloomsburg report, I think it was on Bloomsburg, around AI relationships and people who are having romantic relationships with AI. And the rise of that, of course, is contributed to, it's comfortable because you're not being challenged, right?
Hmm.
If you are in a relationship with an avatar, they're not talking back to you in a mean way.
Hmm.
They're not challenging your views. They're not calling you out for things. They're not pushing you to grow. And I think because online relationships, whether it is, your followers to AI, it's not a real human interaction, because real human interactions are often uncomfortable, because they will be reflections. They will ask you to do the work. They will ask you to grow. So there, of course, there's going to be a fear of having real conversations with people who may not see the world the same way that we do. But I think it's the only way that change is possible. It is by allowing discomfort in and allowing, I guess, fear out, that we can come in and say, I'm not going to like this, but if we want to further humanity, then this is inevitable and it has to happen.
Hmm. When I hear you say of speaking about letting discomfort in, what goes through my mind is just all the work you've done in the realm of slow living and how important slow living is to actually allow ourselves to have challenging conversations, to grow, and to have the capacity to be uncomfortable without reacting and instead actually choosing a response. For the listener who's maybe new to the concept of slow living, could you explain A, what it is and how you bring more of it into your life?
I think the misconception with slow living that we're all moving very slowly. It's almost this idea of, well, we're just going to stop our jobs and just sit at home and read books and rest and frolic, and it can be those things, but often it's not those things. For me,
Mm.
slow living is a perspective rather than a practice, and that perspective is one of, what am I missing by moving so quickly? In this ever increasingly fast paced world, we have fast food, fast fashion, but also we are demanded to be moving quickly. What are we not seeing or feeling because we're moving so fast? So this isn't about the physical slowing down of, having really long stretches of time to do nothing. It is more about this perspective shift to, am I being alert to all that is?
Mm.
It's the difference between us rushing, having a sandwich at lunchtime because we feel like we have to be on, to going to the park and eating the sandwich in the park for 10 minutes and just being obnoxiously aware of our surroundings. It is the difference between grabbing a coffee or some matcha and making it instead, and really spending time over every single step of that. So for me, it is a practice of feeling more and being more present. And those feelings and those sensations we get from surrounding ourselves and savoring our time here. So the word savoring, I guess, is my best way to define slow living. It is really taking stock of all that exists here, be it the people that we often walk past really quickly in the street, to the birds that we don't notice anymore, to the buildings that we walk past every day that are incredibly beautiful, but we just forget because we're used to how familiar they are.
What are some barriers that you have experienced yourself, or you maybe notice others experience in trying to actually embody more slow living?
I think it's our inner capitalist. There is that voice that has conditioned us to be always doing more. I think in that cycle of busyness, we praise it so much. When we have seen a friend in a long time and we ask how they are, the first thing they often say is, "I've been so busy."
Mhm.
And it's like, well, that's a given, because we all are. And it becomes, this sense of accomplishment and achievement. We believe that our busyness equates to our success. We believe that it is unproductive to be resting. We believe that it's unproductive to be in wonder and awe and awareness, that we have to get something for what we do. And there has to be a
Mm.
benefit for it. Much to my annoyance, even in companies when they have well-being programs, their biggest selling point is, well, if we get some yoga classes in, then people will be more productive at the end of it. Versus, it will just make you feel good. And sometimes that's enough of an outcome.
How does someone start to shift or find their inner capitalist and work with it? What are some maybe steps that you have, or just like awareness building exercises that come to mind?
I think the first one is examining your own relationship to rest, reflection, stillness, to work, to hustle culture. And that can be a simple journal exercise of, what did I witness growing up? What were the stories around work that I witnessed in my household? Was if you grew up with a mother figure or a caregiver, were they allowed to rest? Or were they always on?
Mm.
Was there this feeling of there was always this very hectic energy in the household? Even just, when you came home from school, was it very much like you need to do your homework now, or could you just watch some TV for a bit? To then, in your jobs and in the careers that you've had, and even with creativity, what were those stories? Were you praised when you were burned out, or were you praised when you had a slow approach to that? What did you consume and are still consuming in the media that says to be productive is to be a better human being? So when we can start to unpack all of that, it gives us so much information to why it feels hard. And when we
Mhm.
understand why it feels hard, we can then give ourselves some more compassion. Because I think for me, what's hardest for us to overcome is how guilty we feel when we
Mhm.
take some time back. And the only way we can give ourselves permission to rest, to take some time, to be still and to be present, is by understanding what's getting in the way of us doing that. And often it's those narratives. So when we can start to decondition from those, it gives us a lot of freedom. I think also most importantly, I think is understanding again, what can I not control?
Mm.
So as much as we may all want to take that time back or to be still, it's like, if I'm living in a world that tells me to do the opposite constantly, of course this is going to feel hard.
Mhm.
And it's sad that it almost feels revolutionary in its approach, but it kind of is because of how much our society emphasizes work and production.
Mhm. How do you ensure that guilt isn't a part of the process of what you believe being a good human is? I heard you say, like, when I believe being productive is what it means to be a better, good human, which really is the motivating factor. Usually, a lot of times in our New Year's resolutions or the goals that we set, there is oftentimes this guilt, as you name, that's a driving force. How do you find that in yourself or when you've supported others to to move past the guilt or even identify it and find it?
Yeah, I think the first step is accepting that the guilt is okay to be there.
Hmm.
It's almost an inevitability, right? Because the feeling of guilt is almost a confirmation that our systems are designed for us to be moving towards productivity.
Mhm.
because if you think about how we both enter into this lifetime and how we exit through birth and death, they are quite restful, easeful states. If they are both, in these ways that feel like there's no pain, there's no suffering, there's no complications, they often are these like very peaceful, gentle states of coming in and coming out, which for me indicates that so much of our purpose on this planet is just to be here and to live and to exist. And I think we've almost misconstrued that into my purpose is to produce, my purpose is to do something. And I almost say, well, it feels like this like teenage girl rant, but we always said when we were younger, I didn't ask to be born. But it really is, if we didn't ask to be born, why do we believe that we have to earn our place here? And if we can reduce that down to just because I'm here is enough, whatever I do from that space to exist, to survive, is a bonus, is an extra. So the times when I want to just be in my natural state, which is to just be, can I allow myself to do that? So acknowledging that there will be guilt because of those systems, the structures, what you've heard, the conditioning, the social norms, expectations, is honoring in that and saying, but actually, fundamentally, if I know that my existence means that I am enough, can I take 5 minutes to breathe on my lunch break?
I know that statement there, that I know my existence is fundamentally enough for myself personally, but also professionally. Working with clients is such a hard thing and place for people to get to. How did you start to not only know that, it's one thing to know it, but embody it in such a way where your actions were actually aligned with the truth of those words?
I think it came back to this realization I had of, why am I living in the falsehood of other people's stories about me?
Mm,
And those stories were whether I'm not good enough or I have to be skinny, pretty, work really hard to be enough to deserve my place here. When I really unpacked all of those and reflected on those, they weren't mine. They weren't my beliefs about myself. And as part of my process of writing my book and working with clients, when I was thinking of this idea of returning back to ourselves, it was this idea of returning back to the self before we were told who we should be. It was, who am I without the expectations of who I should be or have to be or have been told that I am. And it's knowing also that that feeling of, I guess, I amness, or that feeling of I am enough and I deserve to be here, my existence is enough. It's not constant. It changes all the time, right? It's affected by our circumstances and our conditions. It can be swayed or internalized when somebody says, you're not good enough. It kind of comes crashing back. But that foundation of feeling like I deserve to be here, I think I'm just reminded by my connection to nature. I think so much of this work for me is our connection on all levels, to self, to others, to planet. And the more that we're connected in those spaces, the more we're mirrored back that sense of my existence is enough. It is the ultimate self-compassion tool of when you say to yourself, okay, if this is my best friend, how would I show up for this? It's knowing that your best friend deserves to exist without having to do anything, right? It's knowing that the sky doesn't ask that question, that birds and trees don't ask that question. And if we're one with all of that, then can we see ourselves as part of that, which is, by being here, that's okay. And knowing that there will be always this kind of like, the work to do is just to keep coming back to the truth of that. So it's not making this promise that, well, from this time on, I know now that I am enough. It's like, no, it's a practice. It's having that foundational knowledge that that is true, but knowing that because of life and its complexities and contradictions, that we will have to keep returning back to that and reminding ourselves.
A question for you, because bringing the practice of finding and feeling your own enoughness sounds like a really beautiful one to move into the new year. Do you have any other, maybe similar practices or perspective shifts that you would invite people into as they step into a new year?
Yeah, I think it is evolving past this common resolution idea that they have to be very self-centered, and not self-centered, but self-centered, and expanding that to those different tiers and levels and layers of connection. So when I'm thinking about the year ahead, I'm very much looking into the ways that I can connect to myself, B to other people, and C to the planet and the world at large. And having that very holistic, interconnected approach to that just gives me some more room to breathe. Because I think when they become all in that self box of, well, I have to, I need to, I will do this, when they inevitably don't happen, because we can't control everything, we then start to diminish and punish, right? And go into that blame and shame. But when actually we're allowing our lives to be multifaceted by saying, okay, so in this box, I would love to learn more about myself here, but also maybe I'll do like a course on botany and plants this year. Maybe I'll spend some more time talking to some snails and some squirrels. Maybe I will start to say hello to some strangers in the street every day. That real sense of interconnectedness is how we form this idea of a whole self, so that we're not punishing and blaming ourselves when March happens and we have not gone to the gym every day like we hoped we would. But instead it's like, well, what are my metrics? Have I actually felt more connected to people that are outside of my circle of family and friends? If that's a yes, that's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel comfortable sharing some of your metrics?
Yes. I think, interestingly, this year was the first year that I didn't have any goals,
Mm,
anything. I had a blank journal. I did my audits of the year before, and when I reflected on how I felt, I realized that I was, even if they were not the usual resolutions of things I have to do, but I was still punishing myself with these really complex lists of what I would like to feel. And
mm,
that can be a trap that we get into when we're thinking of intentions, that even if they are still feeling based, which then makes them feel more softer and more accessible, we can still then punish ourselves if we don't achieve that feeling. But based on our conditions, you can't just feel love if life feels really difficult, right? And I
mm,
think when we have this expectation, this assumption that, well, next year I'm going to feel complete and whole and all these things, like, well, you might not. And that's okay.
mm,
So when I realized that I was doing that this year, I was just like, well, how would it feel to not have any of that? And all that I did have was my devotion to, I guess, what I call my artistic statement, which is just like me being devoted to a life that is slow and soft. That was
mm,
my only intention, and I've achieved that because it's devotion led. And I love this idea of these resolutions, or intentions, how we want to frame them, can be these really beautiful reminders to come home to ourselves. They don't have to be these lists of accomplishments or achievements or even feelings, but they can just be a one-line statement of, this is the life that I'm devoted to, and I'm going to do whatever I can to feel more of that. So for me, that is living slowly and softly. For somebody else, it may be feeling more joy. For somebody else, it could be really centering connection and compassion. For someone else, it could be being really aligned with creativity and their values. So
mm.
having these like loose, but almost like with a strong enough level of devotion and promise attached to them, can be just like such a gentle way of stepping into a new year, because a year is just a year with another number on it. It
Mhm.
gets to mean as much or as little as we want it to.
You mentioned it earlier, and then you mentioned it again here. I would love to hear from you how you do an end of year audit.
Yes, so the end of year audit, which sounds like accounting but is very fun, is I kind of just have a huge like A3 sized piece of paper, and I write 4 sections on it. And those four
Mm,
sections are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And I look back often with some prompts from my camera roll or through my calendar of, okay, what happened in my physical self this year? And it may
mhm,
be things like, okay, well, from January to March, I tried strength training. I had a walking practice, or I realized that like I'm intolerant to this food, or I did this in my body, or it could be how sex was, like just anything else in that kind of that physical body box. And then same for emotions, it could be, okay, going back through my journals, I know that I experienced some depression this year. I know that I had some really high highs in terms of love. I know that I really struggled with this part, and we do it for all those 4 areas.
mm,
And once you've kind of just got the like basic, this is what I did or what I felt or experienced, you can then go back through and work out, okay, so what have I learned from that physical self that I can take into next year? And it might be that you said, okay,
mm.
well, I've worked out that I get really bloated after doing X, Y, and Z. So I won't do that this year. I'll try not to do that this year. It might be that you work out actually what I'm really missing after this audit from 2024 is that I would love to have some more gentle movement throughout every single day. The same with
Mm.
like spiritual practices. It could be that you found astrology this year, and then next year your goal or your promise is, I would love to do more of that, and maybe do like monthly moon rituals or do an astrology course. So just having some sense of, okay, I experienced this. What did I learn? What did I love? What did I hate? And then how will that inform the next year can be such great knowledge to kind of bring into a new year. Because it's based on evidence. It's
Mhm.
based on us physically embodying something. And I think sometimes the downfall of the idea of New Year's resolutions are we've not actually embodied it before we committed to it. So
Mhm.
we often make this promise of, well, I'm going to be a tennis pro next year. And it's like, have you seen if your body enjoys tennis? It might
Mhm.
hate it. But if you've kind of got some evidence file of, actually, I did a tennis class this year and I loved how my body felt in this, that is now my evidence that I would like to continue that. I think that kind of allows us some space to then experiment before we commit to things.
It also ties back into that piece around devotion that you beautifully named, because it kind of links us into what are the things I've already felt, what already brought me joy, what already brought me a little bit of a spark, and how can I devote more of myself into that. So it's beautiful how they kind of link together if we take that time to actually pause and do that audit. I'm curious to hear from you if there's anything else that you would like to add or sprinkle in for the listener who's, moving into the new year, is maybe a little hesitant, knows that the goal setting doesn't really work. The manifesting as it's presented in its more homogenous form also doesn't resonate with them. Is there anything you would like to share with them as they end this one year and move into the next?
Yeah, I think it's about giving yourself permission to slow into the year rather
Mm.
than to go into it. If your new year starts in March, that's really beautiful. And I actually, for me, this year, which I'm going to do again next year, is I spent, the kind of like the last month or two of the year doing this audit. And then when January 1st hit, I actually spent like 2 or 3 months in experimentation mode. So I had this challenge that I did with my body last year where I was doing something new every day. Even it
Mm.
was like 5 minutes. And I did that from like January to March. And those 3 months of just play and embodiment gave me so much information to then what I will decide to devote to. So by going on more walks in those 3 months, I was like, oh, I've now been in my body doing these walks for 3 months. I really enjoy this. I'm going to keep doing it. And then I felt this new level of devotion to that in a way where if I just said on January 1st, without having a huge walking practice, I'm going to be a walker now, it would just not have landed the same way. So it's so beautiful and sacred to spend a chunk of time at the beginning of a new year just working out, who am I? Who am I now? From my experiences, what I've learned, what I've felt, what I've seen in the years before, and also just my life leading up to this. Who am I and what do I need based on this version of myself? And I think in terms of actual practices beyond that, the one thing that I do every day, which has been the most transformative practice, is I have a list on my phone called Quiet Joys.
Mm.
And every day I write one quiet joy that I've experienced that day on my phone. And the purpose of it is almost like something that's so obnoxiously mundane that you'd normally forget, but just brought you a lot of pleasure.
Mm.
It could be the first bite of a cookie that you had. It could be seeing the sunrise when you normally wake up a bit later. It could be I was on the train last weekend and I saw somebody and he was filming a teddy bear that he had while the teddy bear was on the escalator. And it was just such like a wild thing to see, like during normal commuting hours, and it just brought me so much joy. And everyone else around me just like not paying attention and was ignoring it. And I was like, I'm so grateful that I got to witness that. And these quiet joys become this list that we then get to look back at a year later, and it's like, yeah, like it's like 400, 500 of these like mini joys that we
Mm.
experienced. And that almost gives us this beautiful level of faith as the year goes on, because we can't control the big things, right? We can't control the big joys. So many of the things that we put onto like our manifesting list or vision boards are things that are out of our control. And they're
Mhm.
also quite fleeting. We often write these things like, well, this year I want to have a partner, a new house, a baby, like all these really big things. And like, they happen like once every so often. They're not like these normal occurrences. But if we
Mhm.
commit to a life of these quiet joys, we can control those because we see them every single day. We just don't
Mm.
often prioritize them enough.
I love that distinction there of pulling apart just the small, intimate moments that are always there in our lives for us to lean into and to experience pleasure and presence from, in comparison to like those big monumental moments that you're absolutely right don't happen all of the time. They happen only a few times in our lives, and they do create that peak. But we don't have to have the valley after that if we also have these quiet joys to kind of hold ourselves to and have them to continue to remind us that there is beauty in the world, even when it's really challenging, or the valley that happens in life that's out of our control, the bad moment, the hard time does come. We still have an anchor. Um, is there anything else today that you want to share before we end? I love spending time with you, and I love what you've offered and everything that you offer others through your embodiment and the amount of time you spent with yourselves. I'm always singing your praise to anyone who will listen. For the listener, before we leave them, any other words?
Yeah, I think just again coming back to that point on those quiet joys and reimagining what the mundane is and how much power it holds is we can get to the end of a year like we are in now and say, this is not what I wanted. I didn't have the life that I asked for at the beginning on January 1st. All these things didn't happen. It's been a weird or a bad year. And we often make that statement because a bunch of big things didn't happen that were out of our control. But if we look back and we're doing that audit and we're looking back and reflecting on our year, it's all those quiet moments that make a year for us. And if we center those and prioritize them and celebrate them, every year gets to be a good one. And, you know, when I look back on, I think it was in 2023, when I got to the end of the year, it was a really rough year in terms of like my business, and there were nothing big happened. And then when I went into my camera and I looked at all of those really tiny, small moments, I was like, wow, what a beautiful year I had. How lucky I am to have existed in that. And when we can start to celebrate those and I guess make them as equal to those big fleeting moments, we realize that, yeah, every year has this potential to remind us of how lucky we are that we exist on this beautiful planet and with the people that we have around us. So centering those feels like such a compassionate way to look at the expansiveness of the year.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time. For the listener who's curious to find out more about you, they can follow you on Instagram, maybe connect with you in your DMs. And you also have a Substack. Is there anything I've missed?
No, that is all.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to get to spend time with you today.
Thank you for having me.
If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own body.